friends, welcome back. My name is Zoe and I am here to finally talk about the books that I read in January. It is middle of February and I am just now recording this video. I have no good excuses. I just didn't want to. I just wasn't feeling like recording a video, so I didn't. And we're doing this late, but that's okay. If I put it off any longer, it's going to be March and that will not be okay. So without any further ado, I'm just gonna go ahead and tell you guys the books that I read in January. Let's get started. I kicked off 2019 reading a manga that I've really been enjoying, and that is Tokyo Terriba Girls Volume 2. This might be one of my new favorite mangas at the moment. It's just really refreshing. It's following three women who are like in their 30s. None of them are married. They're all really good friends, but they're struggling with the fact that they aren't married. They don't have children and they just feel really unfulfilled. One of the main characters starts talking to and getting involved with like this male model, and the male model's kind of mean, but it's also kind of just like intriguing. And I don't know what else to say. It's fun. It's kind of marketed as Sex and the City meets manga, and I've never watched Sex and the City, but I've always wanted to, and I kind of like get the gist, and I definitely agree. It's really, really fun. The women are very funny. It's a lot of satire, and I'm just really enjoying it overall. This was a solid start to my year, and I went ahead and gave it 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read in January had a much different vibe, and that was The Snow Child by Eowyn Ivy. First of all, let's just talk about the author's name, because it's literally the most beautiful name I've ever heard in my life. Second of all, this is one of the most beautiful stories I've ever read in my life. This follows a man and a woman who live in Alaska in the 1920s. They struggled through a miscarriage and were never able to bear children. This really put a strain on their marriage, and we jump into the story kind of seeing them in their brokenness and in the life that they have in this cabin in the middle of the woods, deep in the snow. And the way it's written was just so atmospheric. I mean, I actually felt like I lived in that cabin with them. So one night, the husband and the wife go out and they build a snowman, and they have this really kind of like wonderful moment with one another, kind of rare for them. The next morning, the snowman is gone, but there is this girl in the woods that they both are now seeing. So that's kind of how the story unfolds. It's a little whimsical, magical, a lot a bit sad. It's very touching. It's very emotional. They get to know this child, and it's just, oh man, it does something to your heart. It was written, like I said, just so beautifully. And if you're a fan of just great stories, I really, really recommend this one. I will say I did struggle with the ending. There's 3 different parts of this book, and I was obsessed with part 1 and part 2, and then part 3 just essentially ended up going in a way that I personally didn't want to see it going. We actually read this for my book club, and I was relieved to know that other people agreed with me. The ending just... It's not that it was a bad ending, it's just not how I really wanted the ending to go. So while I didn't love the ending, I do really think that this is a solid story. If you're a fan of like sad, touching stories that just feel really human and transparent and kind of raw, like I really, really recommend this one. I'm surprised I haven't seen more people read it, and I do think it's a really, really great wintertime read. Strongly recommend. I ended up giving this 3.5 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read in January was my absolute favorite book, and I'm so excited to talk about it. That was In an Absent Dream by Seanan McGuire, the 4th book of the Wayward Children's series. Every Heart a Doorway was the first one, and you guys know that I just love this series so much. It's whimsical and fantastic and follows just a whole bunch of characters that fall into these doorways that go into these magical worlds, kind of like Alice in Wonderland or Dorothy from Wizard of Oz, and it's just so good. It's dark and it's creative, and this one specifically follows our main character who stumbles through a doorway through a tree in the middle of the woods, and she ends up at a place called the Goblin Market. Now, I don't know much about goblins. I didn't really actually know anything about them. I kind of did a little bit of research before I read it because I just had no understanding of what kind of magical creature they were. After reading this, I definitely got a better sense. It was very dark, very poetic. Every time I read one of these books, it just makes me want to to go into the world, even though it's like dangerous and even though there's a lot of bad things that tend to happen to these characters. It's just so intriguing and it feels real. Like, even though it's totally made up, it just feels extremely realistic, which is so cool about this entire series. Not only that, but the writing is so good. I love that these books are so short. They're like 200 pages, but it's just the way that I feel like every single sentence that Seanan McGuire writes is done so carefully and so thoughtfully, and there's just no bad parts of these books. Like, there's nothing that's poorly written. They're just so good, and I cannot recommend this series enough. If you like fantasy, magical realism, darker stories, like realistic creativity, amazing worlds, I love these. This was, again, so good. Again, 5 out of 5 stars. I'm obsessed with this series. I really am sad that I have to wait a whole nother year to read another one because they're so good. The next book that I went ahead and picked up was The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. I did it. I read the book, the extremely hyped book, and I didn't like it, you guys. This was not that good. I don't understand why people love this book so much. I have to say that I'm just not a huge fan of the hate to love trope where the main character has like an enemy, a seemingly enemy, and then they end up falling in love towards the end. I just think it's like overdone, and I think 9 times out of 10 it's just not done well, and I don't get it. Like, it doesn't make sense. Like, this guy was a jerk, and just because you find out humanistic qualities, maybe reasons as to why he was a jerk, doesn't make what he did okay. And so stuff like that frustrates me. You guys all probably know what this book is about. Really quickly, it's just about 3 girls whose parents were murdered by a fairy in like the first chapter, and then the fairy takes them to his world and like they become his children, and which is just crazy but super intriguing. I was like really into this for the first few chapters, and then just as the story fleshed out, I just didn't care. I didn't really care about the main character. She kind of bugged me. I wasn't there for the love interest. I have no desire to continue this series. Again, I understand why people liked it. Like, that's fine, but I don't get why it was so hyped. I really don't think it was that amazing in my opinion, and yeah, for that reason, I'll probably be unhauling this one. I think I gave it 2 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read in January was Sailor Moon, the Eternal Edition. It's so pretty and big, and there's like full color pages that I'm obsessed with and I want to like rip out and put on my walls. Like these ones. It's just so pretty. Yeah, I had a great time reading this. Sailor Moon, she's like a 13-year-old crybaby, but turns like superhero and then finds all of her friends to also be superheroes, and it's just really fun. I was reading this mostly just for like nostalgia's sake, and then towards the end I actually really started getting invested. So I'm excited to continue this one. I don't have much more to say about it. I really recommend this edition. I think it's amazing. The second to last book that I read in January was Sourdough by Robin Sloan. This is a really weird book to describe. I believe it's magical realism, so I'm gonna go ahead and say it's in that genre. It follows a main character who is a girl that works in Silicon Valley for a tech company, which I loved because I work for a tech company. I work remotely in Tennessee, but in San Francisco. So I like really loved that she was working for like this startup tech company in Silicon Valley. Like, I can super relate to that, and I love just like reading about that. What was interesting though about the book was that she ends up like getting this sourdough recipe from these 2 brothers that had a soup and sourdough company in San Francisco and then left, and she gets the sourdough, and then she starts making this like sourdough bread that's just like life-changing. It literally just changes her life. It changes her health. It changes everything. And then she starts like selling the dough, and like the story unfolds from there. It's a very intriguing book. I really had to like push myself to finish it. I loved the first probably half of it, and then it just really took a turn that I didn't care for. I wasn't as invested. I thought there was gonna be more about maybe her life with like her company at the time, and it just kind of took like this weird twisty turn of her joining this farmer's market, and this farmer's market had all these kind of like mysterious sort of people and this like mysterious backer, and it was just interesting. I don't know. It was okay. It was a very mediocre book. I didn't love it. There wasn't anything I was like attached to about it. It was a fun read, but it wasn't my favorite read. It was a little bit disappointing, and for that reason I went ahead and gave it 3 out of 5 stars. And then the very last book that I read in the month of January was Saturate by Jeff Vanderstelt, and this was my non-fiction book of the month. I have a challenge for myself this year to read at least one non-fiction book a month, and this was that. It was a really, really great book about discipleship in the church, and I really enjoyed it. It wasn't crazy eye-opening. There wasn't anything that I was like, wow, this is like, I've never heard of this before. But it was just very humbling. It just reminded me a lot that we are the church. Like, church doesn't just belong in this brick building on Sundays, but in your homes and with the people you're with and in your work and in your relationships. And like, we are always trying to be the church. And it was just a really refreshing and good reminder. So I highly recommend this book. It was well written. It was well done. And yeah, I think it's like easily something that like more churches need to implement. I mean, I really did a high level overview, but just a really, really solid piece of work. And I'm glad that I read it for my nonfiction read. Those are all the books that I read in January. That wasn't like a ton, and I didn't really love a lot of them, but that's okay. A little bit of a rocky start to the year, but I have a feeling that things are picking up in February. In fact, they are, but we'll have to wait until March to tell you about that. Overall, I read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 books, and that's pretty good for me. That's about normal. 6 to 7 a month is what I like to read. I am on my way to my reading goal of, I think I have of 100 this year. So far so good. You guys should let me know in the comments below what you read in the month of January. What was your favorite read that you read? I'd love to add it to my TBR, and let's just talk about it. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day wherever you are, and I'll talk to you soon in my next video. Bye!